Hello and good morning to everyone who's joining us. This is Joy Chege from PAN. We're having a few technical issues, so we're sorry for the delayed start, but we'll be ready to go in just a few minutes. Waiting on our host for the day, Nora, and one of our panelists, and then we'll be able to start. So if you'll just give us a few minutes, I'm sorry. I know today we've been a bit delayed, but we have Tando here with us. Tando, you can be saying hi and uh, introducing yourself as we wait for Nora and Veronica.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Very excited for today's conversation. It's not always that, we get to engage one another as an African marketing community. So I'm quite excited for today and today's conversation. Just as an intro, while we wait for V and everyone else, um, we are Penquin. We are a South African independent agency that is very proud to be independent. And our work spans across various sectors from automotive to um, to tech to FMCG to beverages. So we've got quite a wide pool of professional services. So we've got quite a wide pool of clients that we work with. And in terms of myself, uh, I've spent more than 10 years now in this industry. Worked on various industries, various categories, various sectors, and also I have lectured as well at the University of Johannesburg, at Vega, which is a specialist marketing and creative school, as well as Red and Yellow. I got my degree in LLB law a long, long time ago, and I've subsequently supplemented that with some marketing qualifications in marketing management, in performance marketing, digital marketing, as well as creative design thinking. Um, Very excited to have this conversation today, and I am going to share and then we can begin.
Thank you, Tando. Yeah, I'm just finding out where Nora is. I see Veronica has had an issue on her side. So yeah, for the attendees, just give us about 2 minutes. We saw through that, and then we'll be able to begin. Tando, sorry, if you're speaking, you're on mute. We can't hear you. All right, I can see Nora is here, so I'll hand over to her just to do some quick intros, even as we wait for Veronica to join, just introducing the session and what we have in store. I know Tando has given you quite a good taste of that, but Nora, I'll hand over to you just to run through the preliminaries.
All right, thank you, Joy, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Apologies for the technical issues we've been experiencing.
Can everybody hear me now?
Hello, Thando. How are you?
Good, thank you. Sorry, like when I share with sound, it seems to mute me. So we'll just figure that out as we go. In any case, these slides are more to aid in the conversation more than anything. Really love the topic given for today, brand clarity as a business tool, how teams make faster, better decisions across campaigns, partnerships, and growth initiatives. When we got this topic, it was very interesting starting point for us as brand clarity as a business tool, because this gave us a couple of clues into how everything needs to focus and what we need to deliver on. And what this tells us actually is brand clarity is a tool or is in service of business. So for us, that is actually the starting point, environment. And very simply, the job of brand at the core of it is creating business growth. Contrary to popular belief, the job of brand is not prettier work or internal neatness. The job of brand actually is creating business growth. And brand is a function that helps people notice you faster, remember you sooner, trust you more easily, and choose you with less hesitation, and sometimes pay more than the functional comparison, than what the functional comparison alone would suggest. That is the job of what we do as marketers and as people in communication and advertising or whatever space within marketing you might exist in. That is actually what we are. That is our role in the commercial environment, is to create business growth. And I'd even take this further and say the job of brand is actually to create disproportionate business growth, because without brand, you can actually still create growth. It's just incremental growth. And you'd be creating it through, cost saving and operational efficiency and more stores, distribution, mergers and acquisitions, price adjustments, product expansion. All of these things can deliver incremental growth. But the job of brand is to create exponential growth, is to create preference where you are chosen over functional equals. If what I can deliver and what my next closest competitor can deliver is more or less identical, brand becomes the difference. Fame, where you are known beyond the category, where you are loved beyond the category and are remembered even when your consumer is outside of the buying cycle. Mental availability, where you are the first thought at category entry. When I'm feeling thirsty, what is the first brand that I think of? When I need a new vehicle, when my family is growing, what is the first brand that I think of? That is mental availability. Trust, where you are chosen with less hesitation, where people are not second guessing the price, where people are not second guessing where you are available. They just trust that your product and your brand will deliver. Lower price sensitivity, where if you do have to increase slightly or there's a cheaper alternative that comes into the market, that you are still preferred, an easier choice where there's less effort to decide. When someone sees the brand, they know exactly what they're going to get and they decide on you immediately. That is what brand and building brand is able to deliver for a business, not just incremental growth, but exponential growth. And this is supported by a lot of research that Cantor's done around the business effects that having strong brand power is able to deliver from a business effects point of view. 4 times likelihood of growing share in the future, 9 times higher volume share, twice as high of the selling price that you're able to command in the market. These are all very, very crucial elements in business that brand is responsible for. Brand clarity is how growth compounds. When you have a very clear brand, you get activity, you get content, you get meetings, you get launches, but you don't get the compounding brand effect if you do not have a clear brand. If every campaign is saying something different, nothing is building. If every partnership is creating a different association, nothing is building. If every brand refresh removes familiar assets, nothing's building. If every team defines the brand, you ask the creative, what does the brand mean? When you ask the brand manager, what does the brand mean? When you ask the strategist, what the brand mean? Everyone needs to say the same thing, otherwise nothing builds. That is why brand clarity is crucial for business and business growth. Now, in recent times, we've seen a lot of frameworks. We've seen a lot of systems and processes, and a lot of them actually contribute to not being clear about the brand. And one of the biggest culprits is actually what we've all probably are very familiar with, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As soon as you see this in any deck, just know that things are most likely going downhill. If you're seeing the Maslow hierarchy of needs, if you're seeing a brand archetype wheel that says, you're the magician, you're most likely are going down a very unclear path in terms of how you are developing and building that brand. Over and above this, now there's the brand wheel where you are effectively tasked with filling in each of and every single one of these points. What is the verbal guideline, the key communication, the name, the promise, the tagline, the personality, the theme, the positioning, the visual, all of these elements contribute to actually not making a clear brand. A South African example of a brand that suffered and has suffered quite a lot from a lack of clarity in terms of their brand is a supermarket retailer known as Pick n Pay. And Pick n Pay is one of South Africa's biggest supermarkets, and they were in a market competing with other supermarket brands such as Shoprite and Checkers and Spar and Woolworths. And for a very long time, they enjoyed quite a lot of market share, and people understood exactly what they're going to get out of that brand. In about maybe it's been 5 to 10 years ago now, they got a change of management, and with that, the problems came. The market was shifting in terms of digital adoption, in terms of how consumers are actually shopping. And a lot of the other retailers like Woolworths or Checkers and even ShopRite were responding quite quickly. They were responding quite quickly from the digital adoption that was taking place, and they were responding quickly in terms of convenience, and they were responding quickly in terms of the value proposition that they're actually delivering out to the market. Pick and Pay, in contrast, wasn't doing any of that. And it ended up finding itself in a position and in a space where they weren't quite speaking to that middle market anymore. And they weren't quite speaking to that lower middle market either. So they were in this weird limbo space where people didn't really understand where and what the Pick and Pay brand stood for anymore. And they paid a severe cost and price for that, because the other brands like Checkers and ShopRite and Woolworths really overtook them from a market share point of view. What they've done over the past 2 years now is they've changed their management, and they've tried to pick up the slack, and hopefully it's not too late. So the cost of an unclear brand is attention. People don't notice the brand, and people don't find anything that's distinctive enough for that communication that that brand puts out to cut through. Secondly, there's the cost of memory, where campaigns don't quite add up and stack on top of each other. Different associations are being built every time, nothing is compounding. The third is the cost of time, where teams are debating basic strategy questions in every approval meeting instead of making decisions. And of course, the biggest one is the cost of money and the cost of growth. Media and creative spend are used to restart the brand every time a campaign is being developed and put out instead of compounding. And from a growth point of view, what we're looking for is that clarity that is able to create brand compounding effects. Unclear brands keep paying for the same attention again and again instead of building onto that over time. So what we wanted to do at this point is actually run a poll, but because of some technical difficulties, we weren't quite able to do that. But we're going to put a question out to you, and this is something for everyone on the call to just think about in their own time. Where does your brand lose clarity the most? Is it in the campaigns? Is it in the partnerships? Is it in your media choices, brand fresh that you might have done in recent years? Is it in internal approvals and the briefing system and how agencies are engaging with the client? Is it at the tail end of the work, at the measurement and results point, or is it very difficult to tell? I asked this question because it's one to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the webinar. So give that one a think. What is a clear brand? So we've discussed why it's important to have a clear brand and the role of brand overall and the perils of having a very unclear brand. But what is a clear brand? And a clear brand, in essence, is a choice, a very clear business choice. And a good example of this is another South African brand in the banking sector named Capitec. Capitec entered the market when at the height of the big banks dominating the market. There was four big banks, namely Absa, Standard Bank, Nedbank, and FNB. And Capitec decided they are going to enter this market, and they're going to enter the most contested, most difficult, highest barrier of entry sector of that bank, of the banking industry in SA, which is retail banking. And this was a tall task. Since then, Capitec has been able to grow to actually be the biggest South African bank in terms of active monthly users. How were they able to do this? And the answer again, brand clarity. From the beginning, Capitec was very clear around the business choice that it is making. So clear brands don't just say something clearly, but they organize the entire business around that clear choice. What was or what is Capitec's clear business choice? And their clear business choice is banking should be simpler, more transparent, more accessible, and more useful in everyday life. This very simple statement around their brand then informed everything else about their business. It affected the products that they put out into the market, where they effectively disrupted the market by giving everyone a black card, by giving everybody the lowest fees, by making the app absolutely simple to use and navigate. The branch network, where you're finding uh, uh, um, ATMs being available in the spaces where the audience is actually doing their shopping. It affected their branch times as well, where at the time, every other bank used to close early at around 3, some of them closed at 4, but Capitec, understanding that they want to be simpler and more accessible, decided to close at 5 p.m. And some branches actually closed at 6 p.m. It affected the language in how they speak about their brand and how they communicate, very simple languaging. And it affected the customer promise, which led to them even introducing a rewards program that is very, very simple. There's no tiers. There's only one tier. So that speaks to that business choice of them being simpler, more transparent, and more accessible. It affected everything that the brand and the business did. So that brand choice, that business choice is useful enough for a branch consultant to apply. It's practical enough for a product team to build from. It's broad enough to extend from banking into insurance, into fintech, into business banking, and into rewards, which is the space that Capitec is now venturing into. And the numbers don't lie. As I said, the FY 2026 results for Capitec is that they currently have over 25 million active clients. Their brand is valued at over 18 billion rands, which is around a billion US dollars. And they've reported 23% in headline earnings growth. Growth, which is the most important thing about brand and why we do brand. Very clear brand that has been delivered simply over the years to compounding effects where it's still yielding dividends till this day. That is a clear brand. But now, how do we achieve brand clarity for ourselves? The instinct in most businesses is actually to start with the visible stuff. Look at the campaign, look at the logo, look at the tagline, the media plan, the brand refresh, that partnership deck. But those are all just tactical expressions. They're not the source of clarity. The source of clarity sits much, much, much earlier than all of these things, much earlier than the social content, much earlier than the campaign or the tagline or the partnership deck. It sits in that diagnosis step and stage. If the diagnosis is weak, the brand will try to solve the wrong problem beautifully. And we don't want that. So diagnosis is always the first step in achieving brand clarity. Now, diagnosis goes by a lot of names in our space. Some people call it examination or critical review or analysis or evaluation or appraisal, inspection. But it's all more or less the same thing. It's us reviewing and looking into the brand itself to understand exactly where should we be focusing in order to be clear about what our brand is about and what our brand is doing. An example from Nigeria, PNG. In 2011, Fabrice joined P&G's Hall of Fame as the 24th brand inside, this amazing, organization. And it had joined in order to generate $1 billion in sales globally. But behind the scenes, there was also a lot of concern from the Fabrice team in two major competitors being Glade and Airwick. And these two competitors had effectively now expanded their own lines where they were replicating the same advertising as Fabrice globally. So whether you're finding this brand in any African market or any Asian market or any Western market, Airwick and Glade was copying the communication. And they were essentially looking very much similar to Febreze. And that was found by the research that they did. There's an FE case study on this actually that actually documents everything. And the data that Febreze had done showed that in all the markets that Febreze was competing against Glade and Airwick on, there was more likelihood that consumers thought that Febreze's ad had actually come from one of the competitors than had actually come from Febreze. So it's a classic marketing moment where points of differentiation have now become a point of parity, and a strong brand in the market has become commodified and gentricized. And it's a particular problem for Febreze because they were a premium price product in all of the markets that they operated in, including Nigeria. And all of the three were perceived effectively to be the same. And there was even worse news in the annual brand tracking, which when consumers were asked, when you think of odor elimination, which brand comes to mind? There was absolutely no differentiation. Everybody thought that it was Glade, it was Airwick, it was Febreze, and this is an attribute that was traditionally associated and belonged to Febreze and no longer. It had effectively disappeared. So that is a massive, massive problem. They needed to understand what they were going to do. And they employed a number of things in the diagnosing of the problem. They employed focus groups and in-home interviews and deprivation studies where they took their loyalists and gave them a competitor product effectively. And then after like 2 weeks, they go back to the loyalists and they ask the loyalists, okay, so what do you miss about our product? In order to get more insights into how to actually solve this problem. And the shop alongs, the brand tracking, the pre-testing as well, once they actually identified and pinpointed exactly where they should be focusing their efforts. And this piece of understanding the problem and taking the time to actually diagnose, help them be very, very, very clear about who they need to speak to and what they need to do when they are communicating to that particular audience. So the strategy that came out of that is to reverse decline with a 10% increase in sales, and targeting the 25 to 60-year-old moms who want reassurance that their home is clean and fresh. The position that they then took is that Febreze makes even the filthiest places smell nice, no matter how they look. And the marketing objectives was firstly to reclaim single ownership of the odor elimination equity attributes and to achieve 71% correct brand attribution for new messaging. They wouldn't have gotten this sense of clarity without first having done the diagnosis. And what came out of that is a TVC where they did, where they brought in real people and they effectively did a live demonstration with real people to land the fact that they are better at odor elimination. And this was rolled out across the world. In Nigeria, the TVC did not run, but the activation specifically for Febreze did run. And the result is 84% of consumers who saw the campaign attributed odor elimination to Febreze. So it 100% worked. That clarity in the campaign that they were to develop and what they would need to say and who they need to speak to only could have come from proper diagnosis as a step one. So once you've done the diagnosis as the first and foremost step, from there, in order to achieve brand clarity, there are three clarifying choices to make. The first one is targeting. Who are we trying to grow with? The second one is positioning. What do we want to be remembered for? And the third one is what must change. If these three choices are vague, everything else becomes vague. The brief, the campaign, the media plan, the refresh, the partnership, the measurement, everything becomes vague. But once you answer these three questions specifically, brand clarity is then achieved. How do we answer these questions? There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Porter, one of the I want to say OGs of marketing. And he says the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. Richard Ramolt takes this further, and he wrote a very amazing book named Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And he says good strategy requires leaders who are willing and able to say no to a wide variety of actions and interests. Strategy is at least as much about what an organization does not do as it is about what it does. So in making a choice, we are also being very clear about where we won't go, about who we won't speak to, and about what we won't say. And answering these three questions is in effect about that in the pursuit of brand clarity. So how do we answer targeting? So as you know, we've evolved over the last 100 years in marketing from, theory of strategic selling to, mass marketing to target segments. And every now and then there's always, some very bright person that, turns up and tells you that, no, it's all different now. You've got to use a trapezoid, rhomboid framework and call it something else. But the reality is the essence of marketing never changes. We always generally follow the same process. And when it comes to strategic clarity, it always begins with targeting as one of the first strategic questions that we have to answer. But targeting in marketing has faced some turbulent seas over the years, especially in the past decade with the influx of digital and meta and AI and metaverse and what. Nowadays there are three specific targeting philosophies that you can choose from. And the first choice towards clarity is choosing which philosophy you and your brand subscribe to. So we'll quickly go over each one in a few. Then once you've selected your approach, you then have to decide, of course, which customers are you going to target within the parameters of that particular approach. So the first philosophy is from Byron Sharp, who wrote an amazing book called How Brands Grow. And he believes in sophisticated mass marketing. So let's start with, probably the easier of the three options, sophisticated brand marketing. And it's been reborn thanks to, the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which this gentleman, Byron Sharp, belongs to. And there are many brands that absolutely should consider this approach in clarifying their brands. There's a lot of advantages to this approach. And the main thing behind this approach is we don't bother slicing and dicing the segments. We avoid any form of exclusion. And it is true that as marketers, there was a time when we probably did become, too hyper targeted and excluded probably 70% of the market, which feels counterintuitive to growth. So this approach just says that, yeah, we don't believe that customers really need that much of a different approach. Let's take all of them. Let's be inclusive. Let's bring in and speak to everyone. And there's a lot of strong evidence, again, from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute that penetration and getting as many customers as possible is the fastest, most effective form of growth. And finally, there's an interesting theory known as cultural imprinting that says if I use my marketing communication to target everyone with the same message, it becomes doubly effective. The effectiveness of it doubles, But there is a drawback to this approach or this philosophy. And the biggest drawback to this approach is that it is expensive. If we go after mass marketing by definition, we have to go for a much broader, much bigger group. If you're a P&G, if you're L'Oreal, sure, that's fine. But it's very difficult for most companies to have the resources and to afford the cost of sophisticated mass marketing. And as a result, what we find in the market is many companies following the general path of mass marketing, but managing to do it with one or two or more caveats. And these are the type of caveats that we find with sophisticated mass marketing. The first one is what's referred to as geographic mass marketing. So we might want to target every company or every person, but we can't afford to do that. So what we'll do is mass marketing, but only to a limited geographic slice. We reduce the size of the challenge, and we see that this type of marketing quite regularly in the African market. I'm a typical black man. I enjoy me some hearty meals made from some maize products as the starch of choice. And I can tell you with total scientific certainty that the greatest maize meal product comes from a brand called Nyala. And Nyala produces wonderful maize meal, and it targets everyone in the South African population, but they only do it in the KZN province. Why? It's not that there's some, very special strategic reason that people in the rest of South Africa or Africa wouldn't also love this product. It's just that they can't afford to do mass marketing to everyone. And so they focus geographically on mass marketing in one particular area. So that's one way to do sophisticated mass marketing is to do geographic mass marketing. The second way is what's referred to as subcategory. Another approach, which is similar but uses a different compromise, is you do sophisticated mass marketing, but within a particular subcategory of the market. Again, not because there's anything special about that particular group, but because I just can't afford to go after the whole market. So I'll focus on one particular niche. And this was the story of enterprise rental cars. When they first entered the market, they couldn't compete against the Hertz and the Avis in the airport rental market. So they targeted those that needed a rental when their car was in the shop getting fixed or getting serviced. It was only about 40 or 50 years later did they decide to go into the airport rental market. So this is an example of a brand that did do sophisticated mass marketing, but started off in a very specific subcategory. So that's the first philosophy. The second philosophy is traditional targeting. And this is a more traditional option in the eyes of, marketing scholars. The traditional approach of the 21st century, it's, STP, segmentation, targeting, positioning. This is when we take the mass market and we slice it like a cake. And we then only target one or some of those slices. The main question here is which segments do we go after and how many do we go after? Here's an example. In Africa, we do a lot of good, really good tourism. Rwanda is doing a great job right now. But I must say, what Tourism Australia does is a masterclass in traditional targeting. Their approach is to look at the sophisticated mass market, which in this case is international travelers, and to do a prime piece of segmentation and then only to target one particular segment. And what they decided to focus on is the high yielding travelers, who for them make up 33% of all those international travelers across Tourism Australia's 14 key countries. Why do they target the high yielding traveler? Well, they have a very attractive characteristic for Tourism Australia. First, these people travel more. They do more long haul travel, which is essential if you're marketing Australia because it's so far away. And then once they get there, once they get to Australia, they stay for longer than other segments. So they do more activities and they tend to be higher earners with less price sensitivity. In Western markets, they tended to be older, and in Eastern markets, interestingly, they tended to be quite younger. But they're a very attractive segment for a long haul country like Australia. So the point is, while they only consist of 33% of tourists, they account of 70% of tourism's and Australia's tourism's overall spend. Here, we see a very strong case for traditional targeting because this particular segment wants a specific thing. The drawback of this form of targeting is that the more specific the segment, and obviously the more expensive they are to reach. So that's sort of the drawback. So there's sophisticated marketing, there's traditional targeting. The third philosophy is what's referred to as two-speed, and this came from Les Binet, who wrote the long and the short of it. And effectively, it's a mix of these two approaches where you'll do mass marketing for brand building and you'll do targeting for the sales activation. And a brilliant brand that does this very well is Uber, where they'll do these very emotional TV ads and TV pieces, and they then do these very hyper targeted offers like 50% off of you to get you to ride their vehicles. So Those are the three philosophies that you can choose or should choose and should look into from a targeting point of view. Choose one of them. Choose one of them. And then once you've chosen one of them, complete that puzzle by then developing a customer portrait. The final choice towards brand clarity from a targeting point of view, once you've selected the approach, is to create a target customer portrait. What do I mean by customer target portrait? Well, first of all, here's what I don't mean. It's not all segments. It's not a customer persona. It's a portrait that uses real data sources that you would have gotten from your diagnosis stage. The key challenge is to do the targeting and then only write the portraits for those segments that you are actually going after. And what it needs to include is barriers and challenges of your particular target. And you'll find that it is quite depressing, because you'll find that a lot of customers are actually not interested in your product or brand. And also include how exactly we will win here. And from a B2B point of view, it includes the buying committee. So that's how you achieve brand clarity from a targeting point of view. How do you achieve it from a positioning point of view? A good example is Apple. Apple in 97 was on the brink. They were losing market share. They were worth 2 billion and sinking. And Steve Jobs decided to come back in at this point. And Apple was in a very bad space. In fact, Michael Dell was famously asked how he would fix Apple back then, and he said he would basically shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders. So there was massive anticipation for Steve Jobs coming back and taking over the helm. And there's a speech that he actually made in Boston that year when he came back, and he was speaking about what he felt was Apple's future direction. I don't have sound, but we're happy to share this deck with everyone afterwards. But in effect, what Steve Jobs recognized was not only that Apple's greatest asset was its brand, but also that without a clear positioning, that brand would start to move and deviate and become contradictory from what its original intention was. And his first strategic push was to return to a clearly defined position for Apple, and it came down to three core tenets. And those three tenets were simplicity, creativity, and humanity. And he took those core tenets and he used them to brief his agency, which was TBWA at the time. And he asked them to create a new ad to celebrate what made Apple different. And of course, that resulted in the very famous ad, which was regarded as one of the most impactful ads of the 20th century. Again, I don't have sound, so I can't play it today, but happy to share this deck with everyone. But it is a very powerful ad. It's the Think Different ad. And there's also some things about it that make it on brand, that make it within the position, which is the entire message is fundamentally about creative people, and it celebrate at its core what humanity is all about. Very spot on with this brand positioning. And of course, the whole campaign transfers very well to print advertising, transfers very well to occasional outdoor as well. And the result is Apple's market share began to climb. Cool. Now they've begun to stop the decline. They now need to continue the growth. So next, was promoting the launch of the iPod about a year or two later. And they came out with the Silhouettes campaign. And you can see what it looked like from an outdoor point of view. Wonderful outdoor campaign, wonderful print campaign, which moves seamlessly into other spaces as well. Very beautiful, very powerful print ad, which shows the product in action. But of course, they are also clearly all resonant of the three values, which is simplicity, creativity, and humanity. And the share price just continued climbing. By now, in like around 2006, Apple was really, fueling its market cap. It was at $70 billion. And at this point, Apple decided to refocus on its core offering, being the MacBook. And so they ran a MacBook campaign. They ran a couple of TVCs, which were all then translated into various markets. And the core of what they did is effectively positioned Microsoft as complex, as a follower, as a machine, and in contrast, Apple and human. So what's going on here is that it teaches us that there are two very different ways to position a brand. And the first one being to say to the customer, I stand for this. And the second way, it's to say, I stand against that. And by the way, both of these methods are not mutually exclusive. We can definitely do both of them at the same time. And we do see it come across very clearly in this Mac example here. And again, the Mac and Apple character appears simple, creative, and human, and it's a brilliant example. And ever since then, Apple has shot way above the 1 trillion market cap position. So clear positioning leads to brand clarity. Positioning is the intended brand image. When you take your brand circle, your brand framework, and you close that laptop or you put that file away, what are the three things that you can remember or that you want your brand to stand for? No more than three. That is the intended brand image. That is brand clarity. From there, you can then create slogans. From there, you can then create differentiation. From there, once you have the differentiation, you can then have pricing power, which leads to more profit. And that simple positioning, that clarity in positioning will always beat complex positioning, complicated positioning. And of course, you always continuously have to execute on that same position that you would have decided on. That is how you, in effect, create clarity in terms of your brand positioning. The third question that you need to answer is around objectives. And when it comes to objectives, it's a very old, concept, the sales funnel. And it is the backbone of proper model. And this later became the hierarchical or hierarchy of effects, which we now know as a sales funnel. That you take the customer through a series of steps and it results in a sale at the end. Now it's changed. And of course, it's morphed over the years, but fundamentally, and in most marketing schools that are worth their weight in salt, they still teach a version of this, especially in this digital world where it's not as trendy. With digital, everything is disruptive, everything is digital. There's no such thing as sales funnel anymore, but it's very much alive. But we do see this everywhere. Sales funnel is dead. Google killed the funnel. The marketing funnel is dead. How do we evolve from here? 2026 is the year the funnel finally dies. And we see this version every other year. In Adweek, there's a CMO by the name of Jason John who published an article also titled, "In Today's Digital World, the Sales Funnel is Dead." I disagree with Mr. John. And in order to prove to you that the sales funnel is not dead, I'd like to use a piece of evidence. I'd like to use Jason John's same article titled "The Sales Funnel is Dead." Okay, so I'm going to use his opening paragraph to show him that his whole column is actually quite nonsensical. Are you ready? Here we go. Okay, cool. So his opening sentence. "A few weeks ago, I was at work when I remembered that my coffee maker had been making weird noises and was doing a less than stellar job of producing the perfect cup. While I was thinking about it, I took a break from checking email to run a quick search on my laptop." That first piece is awareness. He's aware that he has a problem. Okay, next. "While I was thinking about it, I took a break from checking my email to run a quick search on my laptop, best coffee makers. I read a couple of reviews and browsed a few models before determining that really I needed to see them in person to decide which option was best. On my commute that evening, I was greeted by an ad showcasing different models, and I spent half the time on my phone comparing prices and searching for coupons." Yeah, that's information search. That's interest. Next, he says, "While I stood there in the aisle, I decided to order my coffee maker from different, less expensive store." Well, he decided. "And then when I got home from the comfort of my couch on my laptop, I made the sale." And that's action. So he himself, in his exact article saying the sales funnel is dead, spells out and takes us through a sales funnel. So yeah, very bizarre. What exactly is his point? I'm still wondering myself, because not only is he wrong, it feels like he is diametrically opposed to what he just said in the title above the paragraph. Yeah, I wish I was making this up. Let's fall back in love with the sales funnel. Let's fall back in love with the sales funnel. I don't think that sales funnels are dead. In fact, I think they're more relevant than ever. The problem that we have is mixing up the sequence of steps that the customer goes through with the tools, the channels that we use to drive the customer through that process. 100% they've changed. Digital's coming in, AI, all of that. But the funnel itself is always going to be relevant. Now, the problem is everyone's doing funnels slightly wrong, with all due respect. And please forgive me. What's on the slide here is, the most basic of all slides, but I feel it's important. First off is you see the textbook model of the funnel. Forget this model. It's not relevant to you. It was always meant to just be in a textbook. We are to build our own funnels based on the diagnosis step that is specific as possible to the category that we are working within. And yeah, I wish I could show you an example, but they are proprietary in terms of the clients that we've worked with. But we are to build a specific one that is specific to our space or our category. But imagine you building one that has very specific steps that are unique to yours. Let's say you get to something like this: aware, you consider, you prefer, you buy. Next, what we then ought to do is to just add a final step in there, which is the next net promoter score, right at the end, and that becomes the final advocacy or happiness sort of metric. Next, we populate the thing, right? These things are meant to be populated. If I have 100 consumers at the start of it, they go through each of these steps. It's hierarchical, so the number should always go down. And because you can't consider a brand you're not aware of, you can't prefer a brand you haven't considered, etc., etc. Next, you don't look at these percentages because the percentages are super misleading here. You like if you look at 21%, for example, in the preference, you might say, oh man, that seems a bit low. But no, it's not low because it's 21 over 44. We look at how much are we converting at each step. So from awareness to consideration, we're converting 75. From consideration to preference, we're converting 47, etc., etc., etc. Now, suddenly the funnel starts to talk to you and it starts to tell you, hey, the problem's here. This is where the problem is. And this is the step where brand clarity then comes in. You look at the funnel and you imagine it as a pipe. Now, in the side of the pipe are customers going in, and at the end of it is money, it's sales. Now, you'll never get 100, 100, 100, 100. It's just not possible. But our job as marketers is to work out. It's a pipe that's got holes, many holes. It's got a hole at the consideration, it's got a hole at preference, it's got a hole at buy, etc., etc. Our job as marketers is to plug as many of these holes as we can. But we need to be careful because resources are limited. So we need to look at the whole that's going to generate for us the biggest impact in terms of how many customers arrive at that end of the funnel, because we don't have endless reams of budget or money. And this is where being choiceful then comes in as a strategy step. You can always tell a terrible marketer because they have 1,400 objectives and none of them are going to come true. A great marketer, they've got one, they've got maybe two. So you have to be clear on which hole you are fixing for that year. And because we're going to have other years and other budgets to plug the other holes in other years. So
Hello,
here,
hi, Thando.
hey,
Hello, hi. I must say this is quite in-depth and really great. I just wanted to alert you that we have 5 more minutes
for
to
sure.
go.
We're almost at the
Yes.
end of it. Thank
All
you.
right.
Mm. Yeah, and so when it comes to objective setting, once you've got your funnel, is to be smart about your objective setting. Be specific, be measurable, be attainable, be realistic, and be time bound. Usually, most agency objectives look something like this. It's enough words to swindle the clients, vague enough so that you can't really be held accountable at the end of the year. This is not an objective. Improve brand love amongst consumers using our brand and new digital toolset. This is a dream that will never come true. You're already dead going into market like this, and you've got tactics in there. It's a mess. Here's a proper smart objective. Increase unaided awareness in the accessible and easy segment from 58 to 75% by December 2026. With this objective, a company can pay bonuses, agencies can get briefed. We can do everything from that place because we are very clear. But these have disappeared from a lot of African brand plans. They're gone. Clients especially have lost the skill of objective setting. And we still see them when we're working with, the Unilevers and the Mars Groups and the PNGs and some telecoms. But most clients now are actually asking the agencies to come up with the objectives for them. There is brand clarity with smart objectives. I need this thing, you need this thing, we need this thing, because it opens us up to so much more neutrality, proper media selection, proper agency briefing, and most importantly, proper budgeting. A couple of years ago, the then director of marketing operations, Jim Squires of Instagram, was asked, should marketers be taking budget out of TV? And his response was quite interesting. He said, that's a marketer's decision. The way I think about approaching it is, what is the objective I'm trying to achieve? What is the audience I want to hit? Look at the overall media mix, the objective, and where can I most efficiently reach people and make decisions based on that. That is a proper marketer who understands brand clarity. So, in closing, after the proper diagnosis, the three choices around targeting, around positioning, and around objectives must work together to deliver brand clarity. We need to be clear around who growth depends on, what to build memory in, and what needs to change from an objectives point of view. When these are agreed, you make faster decisions across campaigns. And in conclusion, that is how we use brand clarity as a business tool. Thank you.
Hi, Thando. Once again, that was very, very insightful. I've seen a couple of attendees asking if the presentation will be shared on email. And yes, I can confirm this will be shared on email. Believe people have even more interest in hearing your point of view in terms of branding and positioning. So, on behalf of everyone, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this presentation, to take us through real life examples of brands that exist locally and internationally. This was very, very informative, and we do not take it for granted. Thank you so much, Thando. And to everyone who took their time to join this webinar, we do have webinar series as PAN, where we tackle different topics relating to the marketing industry and the Pan-African approach to it. So we encourage you to look out for more that are coming through PAN, and we'll be happy to engage with all of you. Thank you also, Veronica. I know you've not gotten a chance to speak, but Veronica is the CEO of Penquin, and we want to thank you for also taking the time to join, Veronica. And I believe in other sessions we'll be able to hear from you and get a few insights from you. So because of time and not to worry, Thando, you've taken living with more to think about and how to become better in the different works that you're doing for the brands that you're working with. So without further ado, thank you so much, Thando. Thank you, Veronica, Wesley, the entire Penguin team for preparing this. And thank you so much for the attendees. We look forward to engaging with you in the near future. Wishing you a lovely rest of the Wednesday.